Hello everyone, welcome to the Green Man channel. Hope you're all good and well. So in today's video, I'm going to be ranking the albums of the Finnish melodic death metal band Amorphis and their 14 studio albums here. And I'll be ranking these from my least favourite to my favourite, and this time round selecting my favourite track from each album to keep things maybe a little more interesting. So, Amorphis, a band who have been around since 1990, and like many bands who've been around for a long time, they've had a bit of an evolution in their sound. You can identify maybe 3 or 4 different eras of this band, I think, from their first era with the death doom kind of metal style that they adopted, and pretty heavy albums there, before they sort of transitioned a bit more into a cleaner sound with the introduction of Pasi Koskinen on vocals, and then moved into this interesting kind of alternative rock phase, I would say, from the late 90s to the early 2000s, before they returned to the kind of melodic death metal style a bit more, but with a fuller, richer sound with Tommy Jutson on vocals and a much bigger sort of sounding production too. So this wasn't easy to do, this really wasn't, and I've made some controversial picks. I have to say, compared to a lot of my other lists, this one is probably one of the slightly more controversial ones, because I think your average Amorphis fan would probably have a different list to this, but I think the beauty of some of these great bands with their consistent quality in a lot of their albums, the beauty of them is that we can have any kind of order that we like, and our experiences can differ with how we've also come to know each of these bands as well. So do drop your rankings of the Amorphis catalogue in the comments. So without further ado and without further chit chat, let me jump straight into my rankings, starting from my least favourite, which is 2003's Far From The Sun with Pasi Koskinen, obviously on vocals here. But actually, one of the things with this album I struggle to get past are the vocals from Pasi. I just think his vocals sound a little bit out of tune here on this album. Not so big on the execution of some of the songs as well, but it's for me, it's a rare misfire from Amorphis, but I still do like 1 or 2 of the songs on here, particularly Ethereal Solitude, a slightly slower, kind of more interesting track for me on the album. But, as a whole, I did struggle with this album, and it's one I definitely go back to least out of the whole Amorphis catalogue. Coming up next, at number 13, is 2001's Am Universum. I do quite enjoy this album, even though it is still very much in that kind of alternative rock phase of Amorphis. I think that the songs are delivered better here. I do prefer Pasi Koskinen's vocals a lot more on this album. It has something of the album before it, which I do really like, which I'll come to soon, which is Tornada. And I think, the songwriting's a bit better here. I really like, my favourite track on this album is Forevermore, which I really into. And I would give a shout out as well to the song Shatters Within, which I also really like. And now we move on to an album which was the first of the Tommy Jutson albums. Eclipse from 2006 comes in here at number 12. This is where they sort of started to adopt, I think, a slightly more progressive style to the album. There's a clear transition here and a clear sea change from Far From The Sun, which was the album that came before this. It was like they kind of almost reinvented themselves. And I felt Tommy really reinvigorated them on vocals too. And as you'll find out for this list, I like a lot of the Tommy Jutson albums, but this one actually is one that I go to slightly less, and I can't really put my finger on what it is about this album that I don't like as much, except nothing so much, though this is a lot of quite good quality stuff on here. There's nothing much that grabs me about this album and leaves a lasting impression, but I do really like the track House of Sleep, probably my favourite on this album, and I give a shout out to Same Flesh as well, which I also really enjoy. Next up at number 11 is 2007's Silent Waters, the second of the Tommy Jutson era albums. And perhaps a surprise that this one is as low down as it is in my choices. I do really like the album, but again, a bit like with Eclipse, there's just not much here that makes me want to come back to the album so much. I think there's 3 or 4 songs I really love on here, like The White Swan, and that one's probably my favourite. I do like the opening track, Leaving the Incantation, quite a bit. A Servant is a great song as well. But the album as a whole doesn't do so much for me in a similar vein to, the issue I had with Eclipse. It just feels, like they're still settling in with Tommy on vocals a bit as well and finding their most effective kind of formula for the band a bit, if I can say that. So Silent Waters here comes in at number 11. Number 10 is their debut, The Karelian Isthmus from 1992. And don't get me wrong, this is a really solid album from Amorphis, and pretty strong as just a death doom album in its own right. And I'm sure if you're a death doom head, you probably would have this album quite high up in your list, if not number one. For me, it's kind of a little bit of a linear sounding album. So because I like, I tend to be, me, I do lean a bit to quite a lot of progressive stuff. So, for me, there's not so much here to keep me entertained, but I do like quite a few of the riffs, and I really like The Gathering, and I give a shout out as well to Sign from the North Side. So really like that too. But yeah, Karelian Isthmus comes in here at number 10. The number 9 choice is 2013 Circle, which is perhaps a bit controversial that this is as low down as this one is. But of the sort of, this is where I'm a bit conflicted, and it's perhaps demonstrated by it being sort of in the lower middle part of my list, that I didn't really know where to put this album, to be honest. It has some really good songwriting and some pretty good songs, but it's not a very assertive kind of an album to me, where a lot of the songs on the other Tommy albums are really assertive and really grab you by the throat, which is where this album for me just was a tiny bit short, but only a tiny bit, because there's still a lot of great stuff on here. Shades of Grey, the opening track. I love the closing track as well, Dead Man's Dream, a lot. The Wanderer was a good single too. So yeah, I mean, to be fair to Circle, and I could see this being high up on others' lists too, but for me personally, it's just not one that I gravitate towards quite as much. Comes in at number 9. Number 8 is their latest album, Halo, which of course I gave a very good score to, of 8 out of 10 in my recent review. And the fact it's only at number 8 is perhaps more suggestive of the fact that I think Amorphis have some great albums to come on this list than it is necessarily a reflection of the fact that it got a high score from me. But yeah, there's a lot of good songs on Halo, including, for me, a slightly different kind of track in The Wolf, which was a slightly kind of thrash approach to that track, which I did like as a variation on that album. But it still has a lot of really good Tommy Jutson chorus moments on here too, which, if you like that sort of era of Amorphis as I do, you're likely to really enjoy Halo from this year. Next up is where, again, I get a bit controversial, because I've chosen a very popular album, and I don't know anyone who hasn't got this one pretty high up on their lists, I think, but Elegy from 1996, the first album with Pasi Koskinen on the vocals. And I like this quite a bit, so it is at number 7 after all on my list. I think where I've scored this down just a tiny bit, and why it's not one of my absolute favourite Amorphis entries, is that there are some repetitive moments with the lead guitars where they seem to be doing the same bar for me over and over again, just a little too much. It doesn't have too negative an impact on the album, but now I've got to be picky because I'm on Amorphis' very best albums. So for me, that actually makes Elegy come down midway on my list, whereas I know a lot of people love it, but there's just a slight repetitiveness to it. I don't know how you guys think of Elegy, but for me, it's therefore a little bit lower down, but I do respect it a lot out of that kind of early era of Amorphis albums. Coming in next at number 6 is my favourite Pasi Koskinen album, and that is Tuonela from 1999, and my first Amorphis album too, that got me into the band. So I have to give it credit where it's credit's due, so very much a personal choice that it's pretty high up on my list as well. But actually, whatever genre this album is, it's pretty damn good from my point of view. You got tracks like The Way. I mean, what a good song that is. The closing track, Summer's End. Okay, probably my favourite track on the album. In fact, I don't think I said what my favourite track from Elegy was either, which was very bad of me, which would be The Orphan. And on Tuonela, my favourite track would be Summer's End. So coming up next, after Tuonela, at number 5 from 2015, definitely one of my favourite albums of the Jutsen era is, and this is where they had a new producer at the helm, Jens Bogren, as well. A lot of really, really strong tracks on this album. Particularly, I would say my favourite on here is The Four Wise Ones, closely followed by the title track and Death of a King. But yeah, I think this is where, we sort of see Amorphis after Circle, which for me was just a tiny bit disappointing. It wasn't a disappointing album, but it was just a tiny bit disappointing to me. I felt that, Under the Red Cloud really reasserted that Amorphis sound. And I think Jens Bogren, as a producer, perhaps helped a bit towards that too, in bringing together that really good production of the album for me. So that's Under the Red Clouds at number 5. At number 4, we have we have a really great album here, Queen of Time from 2018. Again, Jens Bogren was the producer for this one. I really like the opening track on this one, the B. I think it's one of their best tracks ever. And that's where, I think there's something, the thing that gets me about Queen of Time is that it's slightly more symphonic as well, so it makes it even bigger as an album. And a lot of songs on here could easily fill arenas, I feel. Not just the B, but you've got things like Heart of the Giant, The Accursed, Grain of Sand, Daughter of Hate. Lots of really excellent tracks to pick from on Queen of Time. And I think whilst as the album as a whole towards the end just tires a tiny bit for me, and they fall into a little bit of that familiar late era Amorphis territory a bit too much for me, because there's just a collection of so many great songs, including the song that features Anneke van Giersberg on the vocals as well, which I really, really like too. Because there are so many good songs, it pushes it up here to number 4 on my list, Queen of Time. All right, now we get on to an album which, controversially is at number 3, because I am aware that this is one of the Amorphis albums which isn't as popular, and it's the beginning of times. And in a way, I think, this is obviously very much in that era of Amorphis, I think, where they were writing, big kind of fist-pumping songs. And, for me, I really enjoy that style of Amorphis with the wonderful melodic Tommy Jutsen choruses. And there's so many of those on display, I think, here in Queen of Time, in the beginning of times. Had a job thinking of my favourite track for this one, so much so I might have to say it's a tie. My favourite track on this album is a tie between You I Need and On a Stranded Shore. Can't choose between those two here, but yeah, a great album. And I think this is where, again, you kind of see Tommy has really made his mark on Amorphis here. I'm going to come very shortly to the other album, which I love of the Tommy era. But first, number 2 is their classic, their revered classic, Tales from the Thousand Lakes from 1994. Really, really great album. So atmospheric. Features perhaps one of my all-time favourite kind of instrumental tracks to open an album, which is the Thousand Lakes kind of piano, really atmospheric piano introduction. I just think it's just wonderful. What a way to start this album up. Creates a perfect atmosphere for the rest of the album too. And I think there's a lot of good stuff on here as well. I think it's justifiably one of the more popular Amorphis albums, with that beginning of that fusion with more of their folky elements too, and almost a little bit more of a prog sound too. Favourite track on Tales from the Thousand Lakes from 1994 is To Father's Cabin, one of the tracks which comes towards the end of this one, which leaves my number 1 favourite Amorphis album of all time. And I did say this list was a bit controversial, and that's because my number 1 pick probably is this one, Skyforger from 2009. And I was talking about those, those songs that have those great Tommy choruses and fist-pumping tracks, and really good, beautiful kind of lyricism as well. They're taking all the stuff, I think, from the Finnish kind of poetry and the mythology that influences their music and their lyrics, but they are really cleverly using, I think, the ideas and lyricism from drawing from their inspiration, And for me on this album, they do it really well, and it comes really well together as a unit, as a complete unit and collection of songs. That artwork is also stunning, and Skyforger is equally stunning as as a whole, taken as a whole piece of music, really. Sampo, just I could go on about Sampo probably in an entirely separate video, but I wasn't going to do that. Silver Bride, great track, great single. Sky Is Mine. This is kind of motivational, actually. If I'm feeling a bit down, I might put on Skyforger because it's just so uplifting in so many ways. Skyforger, the title track's great, Course of Fate, and the closing track from Earth I Rose. There is just a collection of wonderful Amorphis songs, I think, on this album. In a way, I struggle to understand a bit why it's perhaps not more people's number one choice, but that might be because I'm more familiar with, or kind of got to know more of Amorphis from their later years, and that's possibly a heavy factor here. But yeah, comes number one, and that's the end of my Amorphis albums ranked list. So what would yours be? Do drop your list in the comments. Maybe you want to drop in your favourite tracks like I have as well. Otherwise, that's it from me for now. Take care, everybody. Bye for now.